Okay, thank you very much for that introduction, Ellie, and welcome everyone to today's event, which is about getting ready to teach for the International GCSE English Literature, which is 4ET, and this is specifically training on the modular course. So just so that we all know how the chat works, if you wouldn't mind popping into the chat where you're joining us from today, because you will all be international schools. So it's always interesting to see where you're coming from. So if you could just pop that into the chat before we move on to the first slide. So welcome to Abu Dhabi. What else? Okay, so we're a lot of Middle East, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Qatar. Where else are we from? Anywhere else? Or are we all situated in the Middle East? Okay, from India. Anyone else want to pop in the chat box? We are quite a small community this morning. Oh, the morning for me, of course, a bit later in the day for some of you. Okay, hello from Kenya. Okay, lovely. I think and Nigeria. Lovely. Thank you very much for popping those in. Okay, so let's start by looking at where we're going today. So um, we're going to look at sorry, I just need to move my screen around a little bit. We're going to review the qualification. We're going to look at how to plan a course because this is a getting ready to teach event. So it's for people new to the modular course. So we're going to look at resources and things available to you for that. We're going to be looking at the assessment and how to prepare students to sit these exams. We're going to look at question types and mark schemes. We're going to use the mark schemes a little bit against exemplar work. This isn't marking though, so there are just some exemplars that we're going to show you. And we're going to look a little bit about how we can support you. So if you're new to Pearson, you're very, very welcome. We're going to just have a little look at some statistics about what Pearson does. So there's just a little quick intro here. I always find these quite mind-blowing that we've got 6,500 schools, that we mark 10 million, I can't even imagine what that looks like, 10 million scripts, and that we operate in 70 countries worldwide. Always quite astounding, that. Okay. Um, so let's talk to begin with about contents and planning. Um, Lots and lots of documents in the download today. So if you can make sure you've downloaded those because I will be referring to them as we go through. So what you should have in that download under the resources button is a PDF of the slides. You have a pack of exemplars, mark scheme and question paper. You've got a copy of the most recent version of the specification, a copy of the SAMs, the sample assessment materials. You've got a copy of the anthology. You've got the guide to the International GCSE Modular. You've got a course planner. You've got a getting started guide. You've got a scheme of work. You've got a document about writing about drama as drama, and you've got a mop list for the poetry anthology. So I'll be unpacking those a little bit. So if you can make sure you've got them downloaded, please. Okay, so getting started on the specification and the anthology, we're going to have a quick look at these main documents for the teaching of the modular course. So just an introduction to the specification. The modular has two exam components. The modular doesn't have the coursework option. If you want to do the coursework, then you have to you have to do the linear course where students do everything at the end of the 2 years. So I'm just admitting people to the meeting at the same time here. So there are 2 units for the modular. There's Unit 1, which is the more heavily weighted unit. It's 60% of students' final grade. It's a 1 2-hour exam and students answer 3 questions. So they answer a question on unseen poetry. They answer a question on anthology poetry, which is on the 16 poems that they study or have studied with you in the classroom. And they answer 1 question on the modern prose. So for section A, there isn't a choice of questions. It's 1 unseen poem. But for section B and section C, students choose from a choice of 2 questions. Now you can see that there are 20 marks, 30 marks and 40 marks as they move their way through the paper. So I always think about Unit 1 as what I call the 20, 30, 40 paper. And then Unit 2, we will go through this in a bit more detail as we move through. There are 2 questions. They're equally weighted at 30 marks each. This is a shorter exam. It's an hour and a half because it's weighted at 40% of their final grade. So the first question there is on section A, modern drama, and the second section is on literary heritage. And Unit 1 is closed book, Unit 2 is open book. So they're allowed to take in clean copies of the prescribed editions. Those prescribed editions are in the specification. So that's a very quick overview. So moving on now to the 2 key documents. These are, the specification is SO4 in your pack today, and the other document there on the right-hand side of the slide, those are the sample assessment materials, or SAMs as we call them. Those are very important documents. So the specification is the key document you need before you start teaching the course, or just as you're teaching the course. It gives you the content, the assessment, the core objectives, and so on. Sample assessment materials are the first set of assessments written by the examiners. So very important that you've got those downloaded, SO4 and SO5. They are, of course, available on the website as well. It may be that you've been teaching the linear course and you're looking at coming over to the modular course, so you may be very familiar with these already. So we're going to talk now a little bit about the anthology. This is SO6, this document in your download for today. So part 3 of the anthology are those 16 poems that are used for section B of paper 1. You can order it from the Pearson website. That hyperlink will work on your PDF of these slides. And students study all of the poems there, and they need to feel confident in their knowledge of these as they go into the exam. If you're teaching the IGCSE Specification A English language, you will be familiar with the anthology because you use the first 2 parts of the anthology for the English language course. So that's SO6 in your download for today. Okay, so moving on then to the set texts. We'll be seeing this next slide again later on in the training, but this is just our overview of Unit 1. So the unseen poetry, how do you prepare students for that? Well, study a range of modern poetry, and obviously we're looking at language, form and structure, so teaching of those, identifying of those skills, how you prepare students for that section A. For section B, the anthology poetry, the 16 poems we're going to look at on the next slide. But this is the part 3 from the anthology. Students answer 1 question, either on 2 set poems or one set poem and a poem of their choice. They have a copy, a clean copy of the anthology poems in the exam. And then section C is the modern prose, where they study one of the set texts and they answer one question from a choice of two. Closed book, and they study the whole text. So looking at the anthology poems, these are the 16 poems, and there are voice recordings that are available on that hyperlink that can be used obviously in the classroom. So the PowerPoint is SO1 in your download, the anthology SO6, and the poems are If, Prayer Before Birth, Blessing, Search for My Tongue, 2:30, Piano, Hide and Seek, Sonnet 116, La Belle Dame, Poem at 39, War Photographer, The Tiger, My Last Duchess, Half Caste, Do Not Go Gentle into That Good Night, and Remember. So if you're already teaching the course or if you're teaching the linear course, I'm just going to suggest you might pop in the chat a favourite poem, for example, just for a second. So if anybody wants to put, if you've got a favourite poem, if you don't know them, that's fine. If you do know them, what's your favourite? Which one do you like teaching most? Anybody wants to pop anything in the chat box for a second, or are we all, anybody got a favourite? Search My Tongue, Blessing, Piano, yeah, Half Caste. There's a very nice recording of Agard reading that poem, isn't there? That's kind of really helpful for teaching as well. My Last Duchess, yes, students really tend to engage with that. Sonnet 116, yep. Okay, thank you very much for that. So we also have a document called the Getting Started Guide. I just want to talk about that for a moment. If you are brand new to teaching this, I just want to refer you to that Getting Started Guide, which is available in the download. And for example, within that, we have quite a lot of support for you on each of the poems and on each of the set texts. So I'm just going to refer you to the bit about piano. So this is from page 36 of that Getting Started guide. And it is just kind of little tips and hints, really. Something there about, there are 4 bullet points on that page, talking about the form of the poem, some of the language of the poem, the allusions, and a bit about the final stanza and the change that you can see in the poem there. So we have some introductory comments on each of these poems. I'll be talking a bit more about that as we move through the next couple of sections. So obviously that's section B, that's the 30-mark question. And moving on to section C, which is the modern prose section, we've got To Kill a Mockingbird, Of Mice and Men, The Whale Rider, The Joy Luck Club, Things Fall Apart. And then for first examination next June, we have these 2 new texts, Clara and the Sun and Western Lane. There's some useful teacher guides and knowledge organisers if you're going to choose one of those 2 new texts that you can find on the website. So just a little moment now that you might want to share again in the chat which of these texts, which of these set texts for section C of paper 1 that you're thinking of doing. So just pop those in the text chat for a second. Okay, so we've got Things Fall Apart, Of Mice and Men, To Kill a Mockingbird. We've got a nice range coming in here. Don't see anybody doing the new text yet, but okay. Thank you. So going back to our Getting Started guide, if we think about of mice and men, just shuffle my papers here for a moment. On pages 8 and 9 of the Getting Started guide, we can see that we've got quite a lot of bullet points about the context, because context is assessed for that question. We've got some themes. These are not obviously all of the themes. These are just it is just a Getting Started guide. And then we've got some couple of paragraphs on structure and form to help support you there. Okay, so moving on to a bit of an overview now of Unit 2. Unit 2 assesses modern drama. So students study one text from the prescribed list and they answer one question on their chosen text. They are given a choice there as well. Again, teaching is on whole text and they can take the book in. And the second section, the second question that they will answer in that exam is on literary heritage. So they study one text from the prescribed list again. So looking at what these texts are, for the modern drama unit, they can choose A View from the Bridge and Inspector Calls. Well, I don't know whether they can choose or whether you choose. It might be what's in your book cupboard. A Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time, Kinder Transport, and Death in the King's Horseman. So they choose one of those, or you choose one of those. And then the literary heritage texts available are Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, Merchant of Venice, Pride and Prejudice, Great Expectations, and The Scarlet Letter. So again, if you'd like to just pop in the text chat what you're thinking or what you're teaching for each of those two questions. In Spectacles and Macbeth, that seems to be a very popular route. View from the Bridge, Romeo and Juliet. So we've got a few different ones there. Again, if I can signpost you to the Getting Started guide. So if we look at page 17 of that document, for an Inspector Calls, we've got 7 bullet points on context, we've got 4 bullet points on themes, we've got a couple of paragraphs on form and structure. And then for Macbeth, we've got 8 bullet points on context and content. We've got 8 bullet points on themes and a couple of paragraphs on form and structure. So that's just there to support you. It's not an exhaustive list. So I think we've sort of covered the next slide. But if there are any questions about the text you want to ask, please do. And if you're already teaching the course and you've got any, this is an opportunity to share good practice as well. You've got any hints and tips for new people, please pop those in the chat. I'll just leave that there for a moment, see if anybody's going to type in before we move on to looking at planning the course. Okay, nothing coming into the chat. So let's move on to course planning. So this information can be found in that guide to the Modular IGCSE. I referred to it earlier. It's SO7 in your download pack for today. And much of the information we're going to look at now is from that guide. So the modular course is available only to international centres. So that's centres that are not in the UK. It allows students to take exams through the 2-year program of study. It really does kind of reduce the mental load on students, of course, of having final exams. Um, Provides more opportunities to demonstrate skills and abilities, and allows students to take exams when they're ready. Okay, I can see that. Okay, so context in modern prose. I'd like to refer you, Vivian, thank you for the question, to that Getting Started guide, which will give you it will give you for each of the texts some suggestions for that. But obviously, if we're talking about, let's say, of mice and men, we would be thinking about the Dust Bowl, we would be thinking about the itinerant workers, we'd be thinking about how loneliness perhaps is a theme, um, ties to Curly's wife as the only woman, how women were viewed, and so on. So, To Kill a Mockingbird as well, we'd be talking perhaps about the Jim Crow laws and all of those kind of things. And you will find all of those in that Getting Started guide. Do we provide model answers? Not looked at downloads yet, although downloaded. Okay, model answers. I don't think we provide exemplars. We're not talking about model answers that students can learn. So I'm just going to talk about this for a moment. So obviously the modular course is fairly new, or the modular way of doing it. The 4ET1 course is now quite old. So in each of the examiner reports for 4ET 101, you will find it exemplars. So the principal examiner will have picked out what have been live scripts at each of the levels of the mark scheme. Now you'll find those in the examiner report. So not much as yet for the modular, but obviously the 4ET 101 is the same standard as is being assessed in the modular. So I'm just going to talk about that for a moment. When you go onto the website for 4ET and you go into 4ET01 or 4ET1, sorry, 4ET101 or 4ET102, so Unit 1 or Unit 2, in the examiner report, you will find examples of scripts at various levels. So I'm just admitting someone else here. There we go. We also have, some of you will be aware of this, we also have what's called an R paper. Now, the R paper is the regional paper for people who are on certain time zones. So, for example, when I asked you to type into the chat where you were joining from, there were people from Dubai and there were people from Qatar. Now, Dubai, I think I'm right in saying this, do our regional paper because of their time zone. Qatar do our home paper. Now, they're all at the same level. We just can't have students sitting exams at odd times for them. We want to give them all a fair chance. So we have a regional paper for specific time zones. Quite often we have students in Hong Kong. That's 8 hours away from the UK time. So each of those, you'll see the main paper, the R paper will have an examiner report. So I hope this is answering your question, Jacob. But in that examiner report, you will find answers to the particular questions that were asked in those papers at various levels. So you'll be able to see what a level 4, what a level 5 response looks like for those questions. I hope that helps. Okay. So a little bit about how the modular works. So this again is taken from the English Language and Literature Guide on the website, and in your download pack it's SO8, and the hyperlink is also at the bottom there. So with the modular routes, all units can be treated separately and they can be taken in any international GCSE series. So we have a series in November and we have a series in the May-June window. So they can sit all the units in the same series or spread them out over multiple series. All exam papers from modular international GCSEs are the same standard as the exam papers on the linear route. So that's why I said, look at the linear examiner reports for examples of student work. There's no time limit to the qualifications. They can resit individual assessments in any series, so they have more opportunities to get feedback to improve their performance and get the grades they need to progress. Students cash in unit results when they're ready. So once they have their unit results for the qualification they're taking, they exchange those for the grade. That's just the technical term for that is just cashing in. Okay, so that's how it works. In terms of course planning, just like the linear course, the international GCSEs have 120 guided learning hours. There's a 2-year plan that we're going to have a look in a moment. It's the next slide, which can be adapted by centres to suit the context that you're in your country. The scheme of work includes some suggested teaching approaches. The course planner is a Word document, so you can manipulate it to suit your teaching and how your lessons are divided. But this one is on 45-minute lessons, but obviously it can be changed. So this is the sample course planner. It's SO9 in your download. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on how they're devising their course at the moment. Have a look at SO9. Think about what you want to plan, how you might want to do things in your centre. It's quite basic so that you can change it. Starts with Unit 1. This particular one moves Unit 1, Unit 2. But if you don't want to start with the poetry, obviously you can move it around. So I'll just give you a moment to look at that. So I'm just picking up the questions as well. Oh, that's an interesting question about language and literature. That's a tricky one, but obviously it can be done because you can use the text as a springboard, perhaps for the imaginative writing. So if you're having to teach, let's say, an inspector calls, and the other student, the language only student, could perhaps imagine what it would be like to be one of the characters, or that kind of thing. It would take a little bit of thinking about that one, but I'm sure that it can be done. How to prepare a scheme of work in many schools in new academic year often starts in September. 2 times. Yes, obviously, if we put the courses are 2 academic years, aren't they? So it's depending on if you're thinking of doing the modular, whether you're going to get to do Unit 1 first or Unit 2 first, where do you want to start? But either linear or modular really is only 5 terms. Okay, Laura, your question about they're under the resources tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You should be able to find them there. Okay, I hope that's picked up on all of the questions that are there. I will pick up questions from time to time. Okay, so just moving on to the scheme of work and the Getting Started guide. Getting Started guide is SO10. I've referred to that quite a bit. The scheme of work is SO11 in your downloads. They'll just help you plan. There are also some lesson plans for 4ET on the website. And if you want to pop anything in that's been helpful for you, if you're already teaching it, into the text chat, there's an opportunity to share that good practice. Okay, so thinking about the content now, we're going to share some materials that you can find on the website. And again, the chat is there for you to share good practice, or you can ask other delegates questions. So we're going to move on to the assessment objectives and their weightings. So across the qualification, we've got AO1, which is demonstrate a close knowledge and understanding of text, maintaining a critical style and presenting an informed personal engagement. And that's 30% of the final grade. Then we've got AO2, Assessment Objective 2, which is analyse the language, form and structure used by a writer to create meanings and effects. And that's 40% of the final grade. Then we've got AO3, which is explore links and connections between texts, and that's 10% of the final grade. And then AO4, which is the relationship between texts and contexts in which they were written. So I'm going to talk more about these later, but they underpin your teaching. So thinking about where they're assessed, each of those assessment objectives. So the unseen poetry, section A of paper 1, only assesses AO2 because students haven't seen it before. So we're looking there at their ability to analyse the language, form and structure of the poet. Then when we move on to section B of Unit 1, which is the anthology poetry, the 16 poems they've studied with you, this is the only place where AO3 is assessed in the qualification. So they're assessing AO2, the language, form and structure, and they're comparing the two poems, either the two named poems for question 2 or the named poem and the poem of their choice for question 3. So AO2 and AO3 are assessed there. Then when we get to the modern prose, section C of paper 1, we're looking at AO1, their knowledge and understanding, their ability to form a critical view, an informed personal engagement of the text. And that question also assesses context. Then moving on to paper 2, we've got modern drama, which is the section A of paper 2, and that's assessing AO1. So it's assessing their knowledge and understanding, their critical style, their informed personal engagement, their arguments, that is, and AO2, language, form and structure. And then when we move to the literary heritage text, the second question on paper 2, we also bring in AO4, context. So we've got two questions, the modern prose and the literary heritage, where context is also assessed. So I hope that's pretty clear. So we're just talking now about some approaches to the teaching of the various assessment objectives. I know there was a question earlier about AO4, and there'll be some help for that in a moment. This is taken from the Getting Started guide, just to show you that there are some teaching ideas in the Getting Started guide. This is SO10. So this is for AO1. So it's relevant for the prose, the drama, the literary heritage texts. It's activity 2. It's on page 46 of the Getting Started guide. I'm going to pause for a moment and allow you to have a little read through that, and just to pop any other good tips that you've got on teaching AO1. So just give you a moment to read through that. And if you've got any ideas about teaching AO1, please pop them in the chat before we move on to AO2. Okay, so thinking about AO2, the analysis of language form and structure. SO12 in your download pack today is a document about teaching drama as drama rather than as a book. For example, it encourages teaching and learning about how a playwright constructs character for dramatic impact. Rather than, sometimes students are, they might write about Sheila Burling as if Sheila Burling was a real person, rather than how Priestley has created Sheila Burling for this particular dramatic effect. So it's about playwrights and dramatic technique and how a playwright uses that. There is one actually specifically for an in spectacles on the website. So if we just have a little look at this for a moment about dramatic irony, dramatic tension, dramatic pauses, and dramatic conflict. Just give you a moment to read through that before we have a look at something from the scheme of work, which also looks at AO2 in poetry. So this is obviously specifically drama. So moving on to from the scheme of work. This is on the website. Excuse me, it's also SO11. And obviously there is all that material as well that I've referred to in the Getting Started guide around poetry and poetry teaching. Not just the stuff about individual poems that I referred to earlier, but a whole load of other things about how to teach various elements of the poetry. So I really recommend that Getting Started guide to you if you're completely new to the teaching of 4ET. There are also some poetry lesson plans. You'll find these on the linear website, the linear part of the website. So they're just kind of highlighting some of the material really that's available to you. Now, many people find this next slide that I'm going to show you a very, very useful one. This is for section B of paper 1, the anthology poetry. And students use this a lot. They find it a very useful way to prepare for the exam, really. So we're thinking here about the AO3, the comparison. This particular document is SO13 in your pack today. There's also some other guidance in the Getting Started guide on page 52 that talks about things like Venn diagrams for poetry comparison. But if we look at this, they're looking at two poems and they're cutting it down really into what's the big idea of these two poems, which may be obviously a theme, maybe childhood or whatever. What's the poet trying to say, what they're trying to communicate? Then we're looking at language, what have they used, adjectives, adverbs, and so on. Imagery, so some of the techniques that they might have used, metaphors, similes, personification. what structure, and what tone. So I can see there's some stuff in the chat, so I'm just going to have a look at that while you have a look at this. So obviously, if they're looking at the two poems, this is a very nice way of them actually thinking their way through what they might include in a response. Um, okay, a few questions coming in here. So give me a moment while I just pick up these questions at the same time. So the question is, if a student writes down all the points in a mark scheme, the student writes down all the AO1 points of the two poems, then AO3, exactly like in the mark scheme. How many marks can they get? It's really about the argument, isn't it? I mean, the mark scheme, when we're looking at a mark scheme, we're working with two things. We're working with the indicative content, and we're working with the levels-based mark scheme. And I am going to talk about mark schemes in a while. Now, the indicative content is exactly that. It's all in the name, really. It's an indication of what a student might write. I imagine that if a student writes everything that's in those two lists, then there's no argument. It's about how they argue. Um, it's about how they construct their argument, what their feelings are about that. We're working on the descriptors in the levels-based mark scheme. So we'll look at that, and I think it will make sense. Okay, let's see what the next question. Okay, I think I've taken all of the questions. Okay, so moving on, we've done AO1, AO2, AO3, and we're just going to have a little look at AO4. So this is taken from the specification. Just a reminder, the specification is AO4 in your download today, and it gives different kinds of contexts, and it might be very helpful for your students. Of course, not all of them have to be covered, and it's imperative that the students are taught AO4 holistically, because it needs to be part of their argument and not bolted on. So we need to remember that this is a literary essay, and the context will come where it naturally occurs rather than, and now I'm going to tell you everything I know about the writer. It doesn't work like that. So we're trying to encourage students to embed their context in their argument. So these are just some of the things that could be included. There are more, of course. So a few tips about AO4. Here, this is what the assessment objective is, but obviously we need to relate the context points to the text and to the question. It's a literary essay, not a historical essay. That's very important. We don't want irrelevant context. Balancing act to be done there. Now, in the Getting Started guide, there are some approaches to teaching AO4. And this is Getting Started Guide SO10. This is page 56. It's a very nice little way of linking the text and the context together. This one is from the Scarlet Letter, but hopefully you can see how this would work. We're looking again for this AO4 context, Unit 1, Section C, the modern prose, and Unit 2, literary heritage, are the two places where AO4 is assessed. And if we look at this activity for a moment, we can see how this would work. you can see how it would work for your text. I'll just give you a second to read through that. Okay, so putting all of this together, we've got lots of ideas there about content, how to teach the course. We need to make sure there's enough time, of course, to cover it, particularly if you're teaching English language as well. So you need to be thinking about in terms of planning, your teaching time, when you're going to make the entries, when your students are going to be sitting these modular papers. How much time do you need to leave for revision, and particularly if you're doing modular, not linear, where are you going to put that, and where you're going to build in kind of mocks and tests on the different parts of the papers as well. So in your download, the SO9 is the course planner, and SO11 excuse me, is a schema of work. I just have a little bit of a read through those. And any ideas you've got, you might want to pop into the chat. I can see there are a couple of things in there which I'll pick up when I've finished this slide. If you're teaching the course, do you have any suggestions about where you started, what worked for you or what didn't work? Again, there's an opportunity to share some good practice here. So just picking up these bits in the chat, let me have a little look. I think actually everything's done. It was about the resources. So I'm going to leave the chat open for a moment while you have a little look at the scheme of work and the download and see if anyone's got any recommendations for the teaching. Okay, so there's nothing coming in there. We're doing fairly well on time, so I'm going to suggest, while we're having a look at SO9 and SO11, that we take a 5-minute break. It's in my part of the world, it's 10 to the hour now. So if we come back at 5 to the hour, and you might at that point want to have shared any ways in which you've structured the course in your centre, that has been helpful. So 5-minute break, and I will mute myself for those 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on now to a little bit about around assessment. Um, this particular course, this is obviously a getting ready to teach course, so we talk a lot about planning. So this course isn't a marking course, but we do run those and we do have some of them coming up. So just check the website for the dates of those marking courses. Today we're just going to be talking through the two exam papers, the mark schemes, and we're going to be looking at some full mark exemplars. All the materials are either from the 4ET1 website or the Modular website. So, we're not going to be applying the mark schemes, but we are going to be showing you some exemplars of full mark responses. So we have talked about the assessment objectives, and this is just a quick reminder as we're moving towards looking at the exam papers. So we've seen this slide before. It's just a recap of the four assessment objectives that we have for this qualification. And the next slide we've also seen before, but it's just a reminder of where those are. I'm just going to run through them very quickly again. Unseen poetry is AO2. Anthology poetry is AO2 and the AO3 comparison. Remember, AO2 is that analysis of language, form and structure. Modern prose is AO1, so knowledge and understanding of text, the critical style, the informed personal engagement, the argument, if you like. And AO4, the context. Modern drama is AO1 and AO2, and literary heritage AO1, AO2, and AO4. So that's just a very, very quick recap. And we're going to now be very logical and look at Unit 1. So just a quick overview of Unit 1. Just again, a bit of a reminder. There are 3 questions, 3 sections. Section A, the unseen poetry, so selection of modern poetry studied. That's a 20-mark question. There is no choice of question. Section B, anthology poetry. That's the 16 poems that are in part 3 of the anthology. And they answer 1 question from a choice of 2. So the first one states the 2 poems. The second one states 1 poem. And students choose the second one. They have a clean copy of those poems in the exam. They'll have studied them all in class with you. And that's a 30-mark question. Section C, the modern prose. The students study one of those set texts that we looked at earlier, and they answer 1 question from a choice of 2. So the 2025 question paper is SO3 in your download today. So that's how it looks. So thinking now about section A, the unseen poetry, at the bottom of this slide, we've got the assessment objective. So this is where they apply their knowledge of the poetic form, content, meaning. It's unseen. So they demonstrate their understanding of how the writers create literary effects. They're thinking about imagery, descriptive skills, language choice, tone, mood, structure, form. They're using terminology, and they're using examples from the poem. Okay, I can just see the question that's popped up there. Okay, so thanks for that. So you prefer the starting with poetry, 2 poems in class, and share other poems with students in groups. They analyze and present. Yeah, an interesting way of teaching. Yeah. Okay, lovely. Thank you. Obviously, a bit about how long that's going to take to teach depends on how long your lessons are, doesn't it, as well? And that tends to vary. Some schools use singles, some double lessons, and so on. Okay. Oops, sorry about that. So here we have the poem Vocation. This was the poem from the June 2025 paper. same as the linear course. So the exemplars are in the examiner report on the linear part of the website. Um, it's obviously on this slide we've got the uh, poem and the question all squidged onto one side. That was just for for a visual so you could see the two together. But obviously students in the exam have the poem on one page, the question on the next, so it won't look quite so squished. But the question here was explore how the writers present the wishes of a child in this poem. And they consider the writer's descriptive skills, choice of language, use of form and structure. So we can see that there's very clear signposting to assessment objective 2 for students because that's what's being assessed here. Okay, great to see some sharing of the practice coming into the chat there. So this next slide is a little bit of, it's just a snapshot from the indicative content part of the mark scheme. I did talk a little bit about indicative content earlier. Our mark schemes are very transparent, and this helps us see what the examiner is looking for in terms of descriptive skills, language, form and structure, because we can see those headings on each of those 3 blocks there. Now that's not exhaustive, of course, it is just an indication. And now you can see, when that question was asked earlier about what if a student lists everything, it would just be a list, it wouldn't be an argument, as you can see from this. So again, just a reminder that there in terms of poems to use for teaching in the classroom, and obviously we're teaching skills here because it's unseen. There are lots of past papers on the linear website, both for the main paper and for that R paper that I was talking about earlier. The full indicative content, if you wanted to just scan over that, is SO3 in your pack for today. Now, in terms of the mark schemes, so this is what, when I said, we use a levels-based mark scheme. This, whilst we've got the indicative content of what students might talk about, this is really how they construct their arguments. So there are 2 bullet points in this AO2 mark scheme. And the first bullet point refers to language, form and structure. And the second bullet point refers to the references or the examples they give from the poem. So if we look at this, we can see in the first bullet point how this moves up through the levels. So simple, identifying the language, form and structure, that's minimal in level 1. Level 2 is the descriptive response with some comment. Level 3 is an understanding of the range of language, form and structure, and that's linked to the effect on the reader. We see that coming in level 3. In level 4, focused and detailed, and that's the first place where we see analysis of language, form and structure. And then in level 5, we've got that cohesive evaluation, the student who can interrelate language, form and structure, how the poets use that to create meaning and the effect on the reader. And then in terms of examples, they move up through the levels. Relevance, they're limited in level 1. There's some use of them in level 2. They're clearly relevant in level 3. They're fully relevant in level 4. And they're discriminating in level 5. So that's how the mark scheme works for that. Just looking at the questions, if there are any questions coming in. Okay, just sharing of good practice. That's all lovely. Thank you. So we're moving on now to have a little look at this. This is an exemplar for question 1. It's in your delegate booklet. The delegate booklet is SO2. It's script 1, it's on page 2. It was awarded full marks. So, um, as I said, there are marking courses that we run, um, and those will be coming up. They are, I think, already on the website. So have a quick read through this one. You'll see how it's very focused on AO2. And I'm just going to mute for a few moments and I'll pop in the chat that that's what we're doing. We're reading through this exemplar for the unseen poetry. Ah, excellent, Vivian. So pleased to hear that. Yeah, you have every right to be proud. You obviously taught them very well there. Okay, so I hope you all enjoyed that script. So we're going to move on now to, this is from page 13 to 16 of the examiner report. And there are also, in that examiner report, you'll find there are little examiner tips at the bottom. And the one that was at the bottom of this script was candidates are not expected to use all of the answer space in order to get a mark in the top level. Extra space is provided to account for those candidates with large writing. So for each of these scripts in the examiner reports, going back over the years, there are commentaries. And the commentary for this one was it's a cohesive evaluation of the interrelationship of language, form, and structure. Now that's the descriptor, isn't it, for the level 5 from the mark scheme, used by the writer and their effect on the reader, discriminating use of relevant examples, quiet confidence displayed, candidate begins with the idea that the child is on a search for liberty. There's consideration of how the child only sees the lives of the workers through an unfinished perspective, unaware of the real worries and problems that come with having a job, the shift in tone, the possible meaning of the dark imagery, range of terminology employed throughout the response, repetition, juxtaposition, volta, tone, metaphor, free verse. Really nice response. Okay, so that's section A, the unseen poetry. So now we're going to move on to section B, the anthology poem, which requires comparison AO3 as well as the AO2. So we can see the two assessment objectives at the bottom of the slide here. They apply their knowledge of poetic form, content, meaning, and they compare the poems. So they demonstrate an understanding how writers create literary effects, imagery, descriptive skills, language choice, tone, mood, structure, form, literary terminology, comparisons, including language, form and structure, and with examples. So this is where it differs slightly, because the questions, these are the questions for the modular paper. We don't have exemplars for this question because the questions for the modular and the linear are different. However, having said that, there are plenty of examples of responses to other questions on the 4ET 101, the linear part of the website. But let's see how these questions work. So students given a choice of two, you'll see that question 2, it's always question 2 and question 3 because question 1 is the unseen. Question 2 is always two named poems, and here they're If and Piano. Now that command, obviously the AO3 signposting. Compare the ways the writers present being a man in If and Piano. And then the next line signposts students very clearly to the AO2. You should make reference to language, form and structure, and obviously their thing about examples. Question 3 is always one named poem, and candidates get to choose the second poem. So here the named poem was Blessing. Compare the ways the writers present reactions to an event in Blessing and one other poem from the anthology. So they get that clean copy of the anthology poems, and they can choose their second poem. Both ways of approaching, both questions are equally popular, so I wouldn't say there's a preference there from students, but they get to choose in the exam. Yeah, so there's a question here about do they have to comment on specific examples, metaphor? Yeah, that would be language, form and structure. I'm not too sure there. Are you talking, Laura, about the unseen or the anthology? It's not quite clear. But obviously we don't do any marking down. We always try and positively reward what is in the response. Okay, so we're just going to have a little look now, going back to the anthology poetry, at some of the indicative content for If and Piano, just to see how these appear. Again, this is just a snapshot. So this is the thing about being a man in these two poems. So we can see a little bit of the what might be AO2 for If there, a little bit on AO2 for Piano, and then both poems, the comparison, the AO3. This is just a sample. The mark scheme is in document SO3 in the download today, and that's from page 6 onwards. And then, of course, we have the levels-based mark scheme, which we can see here. Now, there is a bar we can see at the top of level 2 there. If they only talk about one poem, they can't go into level 3. However, having said that, if they only talk about one poem, it would have to be really good to get to the top of level 2. So thinking through this mark scheme, the first bullet point is AO2, the second bullet point is AO3, and the third bullet point is the use of references. So we've talked about the AO2 when we were talking about the unseen poetry. So let's see how the AO3, the second bullet point, how that comparison element looks in these levels base mark schemes. So little or no comparison would be in level 1. Underdeveloped comparisons in level 2, and we've got that similarities and or differences there. In level 3, we're talking about a range of points, some similarities and or differences. And then in level 4, we're talking about that they're comparing effectively. And in level 5, we're talking about them comparing perceptively. And then, of course, the references are limited, some, clearly relevant, fully relevant, and discriminating. We've seen that before. We've seen the AO2 before. We were bringing in the AO3. So, but obviously we're making a holistic judgment in relation to these 5 levels of the mark scheme. How well they've argued, how well they've compared, how well they've looked at that language form and structure to create meanings by these poets for the 2 anthology poems they're discussing. So a few comments here now from the examiner report. These are not all of the comments made by the principal examiner, but it just gives you an indication of the kind of things the principal examiner says. And there's the hyperlink to the full documents at the bottom of the page there. So on the whole, candidates included a wide range of ideas. However, some did not provide enough coverage of both poems, and further close analysis of language, structure, and form would have been of benefit. Ideally, candidates should select specific words and phrases and explain how these convey ideas, what techniques are used, and their effect on the reader. Often, candidates could have developed ideas further by explaining how these specific words, phrases, and techniques have an effect on the reader. So hopefully this is showing you how important these examiner reports are, because it's really lots and lots of teaching tips. When responding to if and piano, candidates often compared how if gives advice on how to live life or to become a man, whereas piano considers how memories of childhood can affect a man emotionally. Most included comments about the repetition in if and the use of sibilants and onomatopoeia in piano. The majority of candidates attempted to make some comment in relation to form structure, and some interesting interpretations were offered. So that's a document I would recommend to you, the examiner report. And as I said, they're there for all of the previous exams, going back to the start of the linear specification. Okay, so moving on to, sorry, I can see something in the Q&A. One of the questions is about the certificate that will be dealt with admin. That think they get emailed to you. Okay, I think both of those questions in the Q&A Ellie can pick up. So I will continue talking about now section C, the modern prose. So we can see here that we've got AO1 and AO4. Those are our 2 assessment objectives that are in play for the modern prose section. Students demonstrate their knowledge and understanding of their chosen prose text from that list we looked at earlier. And they show their understanding of the text to the context in which it was written. It can also be the context, obviously, in which it's received as part of that contextual point for AO4. So close understanding of the text, the critical style, the form of argument, their informed personal engagements, their ability to use examples, not always necessarily quotations. Of course, they can be examples of incidents like the perhaps Slim drowning some of the pups, that kind of thing. and the contextual factors. So if we look at the couple of questions from a couple of the texts here, the questions for To Kill a Mockingbird and Of Mice and Men, so they get a choice of 2 questions. So the first one for To Kill a Mockingbird here was discuss the theme of punishment in To Kill a Mockingbird, and then the signposting to the AO4, you must consider the context of the novel in your answer. Or they could have chosen explore Atticus's relationship with his children, Jem and Scout, in the novel. And again, the signposting to context. Or the questions for, these were the linear questions, questions for of Mice and Men. In what ways is Slim a significant character, or the theme of loneliness? And we'll put those 2 in today because they are perhaps the most popular texts for the modern prose question. So again, going to have a quick look at the indicative content or how that appears in the mark scheme. These are just some snippets from it. These are the ones for question 7, which is that question on the theme of loneliness in Of Mice and Men. The full indicative content mark scheme is SO3. So I'll just give you a second to have a look at that. So moving on to the modern prose section C levels-based mark scheme for AO1 and AO4. There are 4 bullet points. The first one is about their knowledge and understanding of the text. So if we move up through that, it's limited, some, sound, thorough, and assured as we move up through the levels. The second bullet point is about their engagement and the critical style in which they're writing their arguments. So in level 1, that's simple. In level 2, it's largely narrative, some evidence of personal engagement. In level 3, it's relevant personal engagement, appropriate critical style. In level 4, it's thorough personal engagement, a sustained critical style. And in level 5, we're talking about assured personal engagement and perceptive critical style. And our third bullet point is about context, that relationship between text and context, little comment in level 1, some comment in level 2, relevant comment in level 3, detailed awareness in level 4, and it being integrated convincingly into the response in level 5. And then, of course, our fourth bullet point is about the references, the examples used. So limited in level 1, some in level 2, clearly relevant in level 3, fully relevant in level 4, and discriminating in level 5. So we are now going to have a look at a 4-mark exemplar. This is question 7, the one about loneliness, the theme of loneliness in Of Mice and Men. It's listed as script 2 in SO2. It's on page 5. The question and the mark scheme are on page 9. It is a 4-marker, so I'm going to give you some time. It's a long response, so I'm just going to mute and just pop that in the text chat about reading through that response. So hopefully you enjoyed reading through that. Quite an amazing response in the time candidates have to actually answer this. Um, the principal examiner said that this was assured and confident. We can see that considers a wide range of examples of loneliness, focus on Candy Crooks and Curly's wife there. Examples from across the novel, we can see that there's a whole text approach here. Clear development of ideas, consistent focus on the question, understanding of the relationship between text and context. Those points are integrated. There's no bolt-on context here. The guide time here is 45 minutes, so we couldn't expect any more than we're seeing here. So it was a full marker. Now on the right-hand side there, under the part of the script, you can see the hyperlink, which will work on your PDF to that examiner report. Any questions about Unit 1 before we move on to Unit 2? Okay, so Unit 2. Remember, our focus here is modern drama for the first question and literary heritage for the second question. Just a quick reminder here of the content. If you are new to us, there's a lot of information coming your way here. So section A is the modern prose question. They study one text from the list and answer one question. Again, there'll be a choice of two. We'll see that in a minute. And section B is literary heritage. Again, one text from the prescribed list. And just a reminder there that this is an open book exam, so they take in those clean and unannotated copies of the text. So modern drama to begin with, we can see at the bottom there again that AO1 and AO2 are being assessed here. So we're looking at the ways in which their understanding of the drama text, including the use of language, form and structure here. So it's the critical style, it's the informed personal engagement, how the writers create literary effects, appropriate use of terminology. Remember, we've got that drama as drama document to help support you in this as well. And then here we have an example of the questions. So a view from the bridge and Inspector Calls are two very popular texts with candidates, with centres. So the view from the bridge questions where Eddie has one view of justice when he reports Marco and Rodolfo to the Immigration Bureau. Explore the different views of justice in the play. And then the signposting, of course, to the AO2 about language, form and structure. Or they could choose discuss the presentation of one character you admire in A View from the Bridge. And again, the signposting to the AO2. And then for an Inspector Calls, we had some characters feel sorry for what they have done and some do not. The theme of regret. And then Mr. Arthur Burling, how is he presented? And again, the signposting to the AO2. So that's how the questions look. There will always be two questions on every text and students choose one of them. So this one is on the theme of regret. This was question 3. We'll see, this is just to show you a little bit of the indicative content. Again, the full mark scheme. This is page 13 of that full mark scheme that's in your SO3 download. But this just shows you how the AO1 and the AO2, just some of the things that they might have included there. So I'll just give you a moment to have a look through those. Okay, and moving on to the indicative content. Um, we're obviously looking at AO1 and AO2. I'm not going to read through this because we've worked with both of these assessment objectives before. Obviously here we've got a different mark tariff, so there are different marks for each of the levels. But just a reminder here that we're looking at 4 bullet points. Knowledge and understanding for the first one in each level, personal engagement and critical style in the second one for each level, language form and structure in the third one for each level, and then the references, the examples for the fourth one in each level. But I think we've kind of probably got the hang of the mark schemes now, and they are all in your download. So I'm sure you want to have another look at a full marker. So this one is question 3. It's script 3 on page 12. It's about this is on an inspector calls. It is a full mark response again. So just have a little look through and see how the AO1, the AO2 work. So I'll just mute for a couple of minutes while you have a little look at that. I'm just conscious a little bit of the time, so obviously you can continue reading after today's course. But just looking at this, it's very assured, it's very perceptive, it's very mature. It's got a clear understanding of Priestley as a playwright having an intention in terms of educating the audience. The characters are looked at, there's reference to context which is integrated here, and there's effective analysis here of the language form and structure. Very impressive for 45 minutes, fully deserving of those full 30 out of 30 marks for this response. So some time after the course for you to have a little read through that. I just want to go through the literary heritage so that we've covered both units in detail. So just a reminder for that section B of Unit 2, Paper 2, our focus is literary heritage. We are working now with 3 assessment objectives because we've got AO1, AO2, and the AO4, the text and context, coming in here. So again, we don't have an exemplar because the linear and the modular papers have different questions here. So we're going to be suggesting you have a look at the 4ET 102 part of the website where you'll find lots of exemplars going back over the years on different questions. So here we're looking at that understanding of the heritage text, the critical style, the personal engagement, the literary effects, the literary terminology, the influence of the contextual factors, and again, we're wanting examples from the text. So these were the questions for these are just your examples, but you'll find responses to these on the 4ET website. So explore the significance of secrets in Romeo and Juliet, and then the signposting to the AO2. To the AO2, you must consider language, form, and structure, and to the AO4, refer to the context of the play. And we'll see that in each of these questions. And then we've got the question about how Shakespeare presents the nurse. And in Macbeth, we've got guilt. And then we've got the theme of deception. So we can see how the questions really signpost students to what is being assessed here. So again, we've got a few little snippets from the indicative content. This isn't the whole thing. These are for question 13 about how Shakespeare presents Macbeth's guilt. The full mark scheme is in SO3 on page 16, but we can see some of the indicative content there. So again, we don't really need to look at the levels of the mark scheme because we've looked at each of the assessment objectives before. And sorry, it's a little bit squished on the slide there, but obviously it's in your download pack. Just a reminder though of how these assessment objectives are working here. The first bullet point is knowledge and understanding. The second bullet point is the personal engagement and the critical style. The third bullet point is relating to the context, and the fourth bullet point is referring to the examples. So again, we've looked at them all before, but again, the mark tariffs, the number of marks available in each of the levels and so on, is different to paper one. So just a few of the, we don't have the exemplar, of course, but just a few of the comments made by the principal examiner in terms of this particular question. In section B, obviously there are only two sections in paper two. Section B, the best responses use the question to build well-developed and focused answers that incorporated a balance of the three assessment objectives in this section, AO1, AO2, and AO4. Remember, of course, AO3 is comparison. It's only in section B of paper one. It was pleasing to see some particularly insightful responses which engaged fully with the question and provided detail from the text that had been chosen with discrimination to support the arguments that had been presented. As with section A, the less successful answers tended to narrate events or describe characters, sometimes interspersing this with relevant argument. And candidates should be reminded that AO4 is assessed in section B and that AO1, AO2 and AO4 are of equal value. As has been the case in previous series, the most effective answers integrated points on context throughout, often to develop the points for AO1 and AO2. Candidates should try to avoid writing absolutely everything they know about the context of the text into their answers, but instead select appropriate relevant detail. Of course, that's appropriate and relevant to the actual question being asked. In many cases, further consideration of AO2 would have helped candidates to have achieved the higher marks. Now, of course, there are full mark exemplars on the linear part of the website going back over the years in those examiner reports with the commentaries. So that's always useful for you going forwards. Okay, I'm just going to see if there are nothing in the chat so we can continue to move to look at support that we offer you as an awarding body. And there is a lot of support, so we're going to spend a little bit of time just having a look at this. So this is the landing page for the modular, and there is also a landing page for the linear, and you'll find lots and lots of materials there. So in terms of teaching and learning materials, there are a number of resources available on the website. You'll see here the web page here has 4 tabs. We've got the specification and the sample assessment materials. We've got the exam materials, and that includes past papers, mark schemes, and examiner reports. We've got forms and administration, things that will help you with the admin. We've got teaching and learning materials. There are more exemplars there, lesson plans, the course planner, and much more. We've got past training content, and of course we're always adding to this bank of materials. So always useful to keep checking back there. Then we've got Results Plus. So this is a tool teachers can find useful in the analysis of their students and your own teaching performance, really. You can see in-depth data on the performance of a candidate, a class, a school, in reference to the cohort. Lots of things that you can do on this. It's a very whizzy platform. You can use it to see which questions have performed well or not so well, and that can inform your teaching. It can help you with revision and all those kind of things. So in terms of what happens, the student takes the exam, it's then scanned, examiners mark the papers online, and then you get that stage 4 where the performance data is shared with you. So it's a free service that we offer that offers insight into performance. It was developed way back in, just for information really, in 2007, just to kind of look at when we started to use the marking platform of ePen. So it's just there are all kinds of things you can do. So you can look at girls against boys, you can look at your school in relation to other schools in your area, and so on. So lots and lots of things there. Then we have Exam Wizard. Again, a tool that teachers find useful in producing exercises, past papers, for students to use for study or classroom tests. It uses questions from past papers, so you get a huge bank of you can mix and match papers from mocks and all those kind of things. You can produce bespoke questions, question papers, depending on which unit of the modular that you're intending to take in in which series. It's a very useful platform. Access to Scripts is a self-service, online, free. It's instant on results day. It cuts down on speculative reviews of marking because you can see all of the answers for all of your students. It allows you to look at exam papers free of charge, your students' exam papers free of charge. It's accessed through the platform of Edexcel online. They don't have examiner annotations, they're raw marks, but you can see the whole answers. I think we're the only awarding body that offers this service free of charge. And of course, you can use Access to Scripts, Results Plus alongside each other in terms of your own analysis of how your cohort has done. So lots of things you can do there. We also have this book that supports the Edexcel English Literature 4ET. For English, it helps students as well progress to A-level or international A-level or the IB or BTEC. It's specifically designed for international learners. It's got appropriate international content. It obviously is for the 9:1 spec that we run now. You have 3-year access to an active book, which is a digital version of the student book. There's also a new edition if you're teaching English Language Specification A. And there are new teaching hubs for that. If you're teaching English Language Specification B, there's an online resource pack for that as well. It's got the embedded transferable skills, and so on. So there are other ways, of course, there are other things that you might use to support your teaching. And if you want to say what's been useful for you in the past for teaching IGCSE English literature, please feel free to pop any good tips you've got into the chat box. We also have Claire, of course. Many of you will know Claire. Claire is our guru on all things English. So her email is there, her phone number is there. I would advise you to sign up for updates because that's how you'll get everything hot off the press, as it were. Um, Claire will support you on English language, specification A, specification B, English literature, IGCSE. She covers the home and the international A level, English language and English literature, the home A level, what we call the home A level, the ordinary A level, all of those specifications for the A level. And she is very, very quick on her email. She is the fount of all knowledge. So if you have questions after today's training, I really would recommend that you contact Claire and you will get a reply very, very quickly. I really recommend you for her updates. She also tweets about what she's reading, which is also quite interesting. Okay, and any questions or anything that I haven't covered? As I said, there are marking courses where you get to apply the mark schemes. Today we were just exemplifying what a few top markers look like, but mostly we were focusing, of course, on planning and on the mark schemes and assessment. So please look out for further training. I can't see any questions coming in. I'll just give a moment for questions before I hand back to Ellie, but just a little moment, or any good resources you've used for teaching this spec if you want to pop them into the chat. I'll stop talking for about a minute, then I'll come back on if I don't see any questions coming in.